The overthrow of the Roman monarchy was an event in ancient Rome that took place between the 6th and 5th centuries BC, where a political revolution replaced the then existing Roman monarchy under Lucius Tarquinius Superbus with a republic. The details of the event were largely forgotten by the Romans a few centuries later. Later Roman historians presented a narrative of the events, traditionally dated to circa 509 BC, but it is largely believed to be fictitious by modern scholars. The traditional account portrays a dynastic struggle in which the king's second son, Sextus Tarquinius, assaults a noblewoman, Lucretia. Upon revealing the assault to some Roman nobleman, she commits suicide. The Roman nobleman, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, obtained the support of the Roman aristocracy and the people to expel the king and his family and create a republic. The Roman army, supporting Brutus, forces the king into exile. Despite a number of attempts by Lucius Tarquinius Superbus to reinstate the monarchy, the Roman people are successful in establishing a republic and thereafter elected 2 consuls annually to rule the city. Many modern scholars dismiss this narrative as fictitious. There does not exist, however, any concrete evidence for or against it. Various scholars have dismissed aspects of the traditional story, from the historicity of almost all of its major characters to the overthrow's entire existence. The chronology. Scholars and the ancient sources themselves disagree on when the monarchy was overthrown and how old the resulting republic was. The most well-known date for the establishment of the republic, and therefore the expulsion of the kings, is 509 BC. The specific dating to 509 BC emerges from the Varronian chronology, assembled during the late Republic by Marcus Terentius Varro, and later used by the Fasti Capitolini, which, likely in the earlier period, runs 4 years behind the actual dates. The simplest way for the Romans to have inferred the age of their republic would have been to look at the list of consuls, of which 2 were elected every year, and count the number of consular pairs to surmise that the republic had existed for however many years corresponded. The Fasti Capitolini, relying on the Varronian chronology, go back to 509 BC. Livy's list of consuls points to the republic having begun around 502 to 501 BC. Of course, this would have relied on the lists of consuls being accurate. Later historians reported dates roughly around that time, implying that the republic was founded, according to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, in the first year of the 68th Olympiad, or the year Isagoras was eponymous archon at Athens, implying 508 to 507 BC. According to Polybius, 28 years before Xerxes crossed into Greece, implying 508 BC, or, according to a census in 389 or 388 BC, 119 years before it, implying 508 or 507 BC. A further account is given by Gnaeus Flavius, who asserted his temple to Concordia was dedicated 204 years after the dedication of the capital. Because his temple was dedicated in 303 BC, this implies the capital, which traditionally was held to have been dedicated in the first year of the Republic, was dedicated in 507. However, modern scholars are skeptical of much of this traditional chronology, especially that related to the dedication of the capital. This relates mainly to debate over whether the earlier entries on the consular fasti are fabrications. Many historians have argued that the fasti are an unreliable anachronism of the late Republic. Resolution of this topic is difficult, however, due to the absolute insufficiency of reliable sources, such that, as the historian Fred Drogula remarks, we have no way to prove or disprove most of the information contained. The traditional account. Roman tradition held that there were 7 kings of Rome who reigned from the city's founding, traditionally dated to 753 BC by Romulus, up to the reign of Tarquin. Archaeological evidence indicates there were kings in Rome, but most scholars do not believe that the traditional narrative is historical, ascribing its characters and details to later literary invention. According to the traditional account, a group of aristocrats overthrew the last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, in response to the assault of the noblewoman Lucretia by the king's second son, Sextus Tarquinius. After revealing the assault to some noblemen, Lucretia commits suicide. The resulting outrage leads to an uprising against the ruling family, led by some of the king's relatives, Lucius Junius Brutus, the king's nephew, Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, the king's cousin and Lucretia's husband, and Spurius Lucretius Tricipitinus, Lucretia's father. They are also joined by an influential friend, Publius Valerius Publicola. During this time, Tarquin was conducting a war against Ardea, but rushes back to Rome on news of the coup. However, the city is shut before him, and the coup leaders convince the army at Ardea to join them, leading to the expulsion of the king's sons. Brutus and Collatinus then become the first consuls, with Brutus administering an oath before the people to never again tolerate a king in Rome and to kill anyone who attempts to restore the monarchy. Among his reforms, he proposes the banishment of all members of the Tarquin clan, leading also to the banishment of his co-consul Collatinus, who is replaced in office by Publicola. Note, however, that the Romans also report that in this early period, the consuls were initially called praetores, deriving from leader. Soon after, Brutus's 2 sons, brothers of Brutus's wife, the Vitelli, the Achilli, and relatives of Collatinus, are discovered plotting to restore the monarchy. After the conspiracy is exposed by a slave, Brutus orders the death of his own sons and relatives. Meanwhile, Tarquin flees to Etruria and persuades various cities to attack Rome and restore him to the throne. They are unsuccessful and defeated at the Battle of Silva Arzia, where Brutus falls in battle. Publicola then returns to celebrate a triumph of victory over the Etruscans. Tarquin then requests aid from Lars Porsena, the king of Clusium, who marches on Rome but is stopped by Horatius Cocles, who defends a bridge alone against Porsena's forces until it can be demolished. The heroism of the Republic's use and Rome's force of arms persuade Porsena to give up his campaign. Tarquin then appeals to his son-in-law, Octavius Mamilius of Tusculum, who mobilizes the Latin League against Rome, until they too are defeated at the Battle of Lake Regillus, with the Romans receiving divine assistance from Castor and Pollux. With no more allies willing to attack the Romans, Tarquin leaves for a more permanent exile in Cumae before dying in 495 BC. The Roman government then falls into the hands of a group of aristocratic families, the patricians, who then elect magistrates from among their number, setting up conditions for the so-called conflict of the orders. The traditional account is likely derived from an earlier oral tradition. Barthold Georg Niebuhr, in the early 19th century, posited that the oral tradition may have been transmitted by poems, sung or recited by bards at banquets during the Republic. While this ballad theory is no longer widely accepted, T.P. Wiseman has more recently argued that the stories were transmitted by means of public performance of plays dramatizing historical events. Such plays would be especially important in a society with low literacy, and are perhaps supported by archaeological evidence suggesting circulation of Greek myths and stories in Italy as far back as the Archaic period. Attilio Mastrocinque, in A Companion to Livy, for example, identifies Lucius Accius's tragedy Brutus as a source for some of the stories transmitted via Livy. The sources we have today for the monarchy and the earliest parts of the Republic are notoriously unreliable literary sources. Livy, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, along with some supporting work from Plutarch's Life of Poplicola. The first literary history in Rome was written by Quintus Fabius Pictor in circa 200 BC, centuries after the actual fall of the monarchy.